scenario. So imagine you are sitting in the OPD. It's a 55-year-old man, and by the way, the patient I'm presenting was truly my patient. He had LUTS for 2 years. A rectal examination was a T2/T3. His PSA was 20. MRI showed a bulky disease and an early SV invasion, that is seminal invasion. And biopsy showed a Gleason 7 disease. Bone scan, no obvious skeletal metastasis. This patient was diagnosed in 2008-9. I came to India in 2013. At that point of time in 8-9, the common practice, as most of you would have realized by now, is to have EBRT and ADT for 3 years. This was based on the BOLA trial in 2002-2003, where they recommended EBRT and ADT for such patients. And sadly, as expected in most of the cases, he had a biochemical recurrence at 2011. And his PSA was 8. He then went on to have the radiotherapist gave HDR brachytherapy for him. And after that, he developed CRPC in 2012. Was seen by a medical oncologist. In 2013, January, I met him, the PSA of 26. In 2012, he also had chemotherapy. And from that point, between 2013, January to about June 2014, he had 8 admissions, multiple hospital visits, bilateral ureteric obstruction, recurrent hematuria. I put stents, that stents failed, put bilateral nephrostomies. He had recurrent catheter blockage that was difficult to manage, put an SPC. Finally, we lost him. The last 2 years of his life was truly miserable. Many of you who are listening to this presentation would be thinking, yeah, I have seen this happening to my patients as well. Yeah, it is a very common scenario. Now we have to start thinking, what is it? How is it relevant to us in our practice? Prostate cancer in India kills. If any of you are thinking that prostate cancer, unlike the West, which is always told us prostate cancer never kills, you can live with the disease, you die with the disease rather than by the disease, prostate cancer in India kills the patient. The reason for that is we have high risk and locally advanced disease. A lot of patients have metastatic disease at presentation. RT has been the standard of care, and therefore the above mentioned scenario has been very common. And added to that, Indian patients sadly don't have a much of palliative care support as well in the terminally ill setting. This is prostate cancer in India in Globocon data. As you can see, prostate cancer was less common compared to lung or oral cavity cancer, and therefore people think, oh, what's the big deal about it? This is something which happens rarely. Now, I want you to focus on the red line, which is the incidence, and the blue line, which is the mortality. The mortality of India, if you're diagnosed with prostate cancer, it's likely that you're going to die of the cancer rather than live with the cancer. That was, since the Globocon started publishing data, there was a good study came in Metagene, which clearly showed that prostate cancer has started becoming the second most common cancer in men in many parts of India, Kolkata, Delhi, Pune, Bangalore, Trivandrum. And if you look at the data sheet over time, you can see that there is a progression, a joint point progression of prostate cancer, meaning that the prostate cancer is being picked up much more common. Obviously, whether there's an increased incidence or whether there is an increased awareness is almost impossible to say. But nonetheless, it is the fact that we are having a lot more prostate cancer patients with us than what we had in the past. Delhi Cancer Registry showed a huge increase in the prostate cancer over time. But if you look at this paragraph is important. If you look at the prostate cancer incidence in India, is much less compared to North America or South Europe or even the total Europe itself. We are very close to the Western Asian population. So in India, we have less amount of prostate cancer, but when they present, they have higher risk of prostate cancer, and high-grade disease and advanced disease is much more common. When we have such an advanced disease, then we have to see and think, do we not need to change it? Let us pause for a second. Let us think of other cancers, say colorectal cancer. What do we do for colorectal cancer? Let's say what we do for breast cancer. A breast cancer patient gets surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, hormones, newer drugs, multiple treatments in a sequential fashion or in a combined fashion as they deem fit according to the 21st century treatment plans. What sin did the prostate cancer patient do? Why should we always say, you get one treatment, orchidectomy, maybe some radiation, go away from me? That's not fair. Will you choose a treatment which gives you survival advantage, allows sequential therapy, avoids long-term local problems, and improves quality of life? Then you do radical prostatectomy. The commonly held misconceptions, especially for exam-going PGs, I'm sure these questions will be asked in your exams as well, is that radical prostatectomy is not feasible in high-risk disease, should not be done because there is no survival advantage. Anyway, the patients need radiotherapy. Why don't you give radiotherapy beforehand rather than radical prostatectomy? These are the commonly held conceptions. Now, I'm going to put a case and prove to you that radical prostatectomy as a first-line therapy is the right thing to do. So before we go and think about what is radical prostatectomy, we have to think, what is high-risk disease? What do you mean by high-risk disease? And you will be bewildered to know that there are so many definitions of high-risk disease. The commonly used definitions is the Amico classification, which is also followed by EAU. But NCCN also has high and very high-risk disease as classification. Generally more than T2C, PSA more than 20, Gleason 8, 9, 10. And you think for a second, majority of the Indian patients are PSA more than 20, majority of them are more than T2C. And at least a reasonable majority are Gleason 8, 9, 10. So the bulk of our population is a high-risk disease to start with. The commonly used classification D-Amico is very clearly written for the sake of exam-going students, more than 20 or 8 to 10 or T2C. What is advanced prostate cancer? High-risk cancer may not be advanced. High-risk can be high risk, but locally advanced cancer inevitably is high risk. So locally advanced cancer is when you have a T3 or a T3B, which is invasion of the seminal vesicle, metastatic disease, which can be oligometastatic or diffusely metastatic, a pelvic nodal metastasis, a non-pelvic nodal metastasis. Okay, so what are the principles of treating such locally advanced disease or advanced disease? The first thing you are trying to do, and we have to make this very clear to the patient, is that here we are not aiming for a cure. And when I say cure, you are telling a patient that your cancer won't come back again, at least a very high chance the cancer won't come back again. You are unlikely you need any further treatment in future. However, in locally advanced disease or high-risk disease, we have to tell the patient, you are taking the first step of many treatments that you are requiring in future. There is a difference between the two, and we should also be very clear that we say that we are likely to give you some extra bit of life to you, and definitely we are going to give you a lot better quality of life. All your local symptoms will go away and your life that you live will be worthwhile living. Is radical feasible in high-risk disease? As I said, disease, minimally invasive radical prostatectomy is very much feasible in high-risk disease. The joy is that what is deemed as high-risk disease and you go ahead and do a treatment, you'll find that a reasonable number will turn out to be a localized disease where you have potentially cured the patient. Rectal injury is as common as any other radical prostatectomy. Continence is similar, but a reasonable number of them will need further treatment in future. If you look at radical prostatectomy open or robotic, no difference in the complications or side effects or positive surgical margins. RARP was associated with lower rates of transfusion and shorter hospitalization. Wide excision or nerve sparing. There are people in the world who will believe that selective nerve sparing can be done, but I am sternly believing that when you are going to do this operation, you go with a singular aim for giving the best negative margin that you can ever give to this patient. So hence, attempting to do nerve sparing, in my opinion, is sin. Lymphadenectomy, no, I know there will be people who will argue whether lymphadenectomy is curative or therapeutic or non-therapeutic. My simple argument is that it is definitely prognostic. Therefore, let us do it and let's do extended pelvic nodal lymph node dissection. Open or robot, doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable, that's fine. And these are available in the EAU guidelines. Follow the EAU guideline. You can follow the Partin's table to select which patients need EPLND. But in my opinion, anybody who has more than T2C, more than 20, 8, 9, 10, you do extended pelvic lymph node dissection. As you know very well, outcomes of men in N1 disease depend upon the number of nodes, which I strongly once again believe that more the number of nodes you dissect, better clearance you give, better longevity you give. I'm going to share a video of a radical prostatectomy for people who have not seen one. This will be an opportunity to see. Meanwhile, keep your questions coming.
Sir, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to switch off the audio.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and I'll start the screen share with the video. Yeah, is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to play a video of extraperitoneal robotic radical prostatectomy, and I'm going to talk you through this. So the creation of the space is done with a spacer balloon. For those who have seen me doing it, that is quite useful. Those who have not seen me doing it, this is how the final port positions are. I use all the forearm of robot and the right-sided assistant arm. I have only one assistant arm compared to the transperitoneal port placement where you have two assistant arms or two assistant ports. The 12 mm assistant port is placed somewhere lateral to the colon after creating a space there for the assistant. So, as you can see, extraperitoneal surgery can be a bit tricky, but the joy of the extraperitoneal operation is that we can literally do this as a day case operation. We do it in the morning, and by evening, patient can be getting up and walking. And there is also a lot of discussion as whether extraperitoneal operation will it impair the lymphadenectomy? Answer is no. The only disadvantage of extraperitoneal operation is that you need a lot more expertise to create the space and go and do it. The space that you're operating is a tiny space, and hence there will be a reasonable amount of instrument clash. If you are a novice, I would strongly recommend go with the transperitoneal route, and once you're comfortable, you can try this one. So all the space in the lateral left side of the lateral pelvic wall and the abdominal wall is created, and we are getting the lateral ports in. Okay, so two lateral ports have come in. The abdominal port is also in, and now we are ready to go. Okay, now after that, what you are seeing here, follow my cursor. What you are seeing is the pelvic brim. I am removing all the fat relevant to the prostate. It is part of the wide local excision of the prostate. All the fat on top of the prostate will go. I am doing the wide incision on the endopelvic fascia. As you can see, the levator ani is laid completely bare. Then we come to the bladder neck. This is the urethra. So I am always very liberal in terms of taking a wide margin in the bladder neck as well. As I always say, continence will be recovered in these patients. Just because you are tight in your bladder neck margin, yeah, they may recover faster, but again, there is a potential chance of positive margins. Now I take the catheter on a stretch and then go into the posterior plane. What my left hand is holding is the seminal vesicle, and as you see, I'm creating the extra space on the left side, and I'm doing a wide local excision of the seminal vesicle. You can see the fat on the seminal vesicle going with the patient as well, going with the prostate as well. Okay, that is the vas. You divide that. You divide the seminal vesicle artery, and then the fat around the seminal vesicle, and the whole thing goes as one en masse product. The two seminal vesicle are hold up, and you open the posterior plane, where you go into the extrafascial plane, not in the transfascial plane. For those people who are seeing it, this is the transfascial plane. If you go here, you will go into the transfascial plane, which is nerve sparing plane. And what I'm doing is wide excision. I'm not giving much of importance to the nerves there. I'm so sorry for those people who strongly believe in nerve sparing. Here, the idea is to give wide local excision. Yes, I am. See my cursor, as you will see definitely. This is on the left side now. The left side pillar is up, and here the that is a neurovascular bundle. The hemolog clip is going under the neurovascular bundle, and you divide that to this is the prostatic artery, and the scissors is touching the neurovascular bundle. Clip is applied now, and the neurovascular bundle is now divided. Further clips, and you can see the big neurovascular bundle lying on top of the prostate. Okay, so DVC stitch is coming through now. I divide the pubo prostatic ligament so that I get a good DVC stitch across. No compromise on that, so that the bleeding is stopped. Of late, I'm doing cold cut, whereby I don't stitch the DVC upfront. I cut it and then stitch it after that. Once again, for people who are starting radical prostatectomy, that's not something I will advise. I will definitely advise that you do a DVC stitch before you cut. Apical margin, as you can see, concentrate on the prostate. You will see that there is a good tissue layer on the prostate. This is exactly what you should do. You divide into the plane between the DVC and the prostate. And here you see the urethra. After the urethra is divided, you start the anastomosis, whereby I do a continuous anastomosis using Stratafix. It's done, typically starting at 6 o'clock position. One arm, one thread goes to the left side and one thread goes to the right side. Now, the sorrow of extraperitoneal surgery is that the space at which you're operating is very small, and you are going to find yourself, the instruments are clashing a bit as you're operating. However, as I said, once you are a bit experienced, after you have done your first 40 or 50 cases, you will find that it is not that difficult to do extraperitoneal as well. Previously, I used to use silicone catheters. Nowadays, I'm just using the simple Foley. Previously, I used to keep the Foley for 14 days. Nowadays, I keep it only for 7 days. So, I have also changed my technique over time. So, going back into our presentation one more time. Okay, right. So, going back to the presentation mode. Okay, so as you have seen, the patient I operated was a PSA 30, Gleason 8. What I didn't show in the video was that a bilateral EPLND was done. Because I put the ports quite cranial, you can easily go up to the bifurcation of common iliac and do your lymphadenectomy as described in the textbooks. The complication of doing high-risk disease is no different than complications of doing a standard disease. How does a patient perceive that? Patients, no difference between the two arms in terms of RP versus IMRT and ADT. What really hurts the patient is the ADT. Okay, now, those people who claim that, RT is better than RP, we are going to see some important numbers, which will be a very telltale sign. Keep in mind, RCT cannot be done in such setting. All we have is retrospective data. I call the retrospective data as street data. That is what is done every day. That is what you are going to see in your practice. So I call it as street smart data. Yeah. Okay. I have two questions. I'll answer and move forward. Santosh has asked a question for a suture. Previously, I used to use Quill. Nowadays, I use Stratafix 20 double end. Sanjay has asked, Saurabh has asked a question. Why do you recommend DVC stitch for novice surgeon not cutting in front? Any gross difference? Once you put a DVC stitch, your cut is very clean. Especially when you want to do the apex, at least in the first, the apical bleeding with the artery splashing onto your camera is the most scary thing. And controlling the camera, keeping at a distance but not very close to it, but at the same time able to see, takes some experience to achieve. And therefore, at least for the first 20 to 30 cases, I would strongly recommend a DVC stitch before you cut it. Sanjay Sureka has asked, extent of EPLND in your practice, do you send frozen section? No, I don't send frozen section. EPLND for me is up to the common iliac bifurcation. Just at the root of the common iliac, I stop. Now, whether I take it to the presacral nodes, in patients who there is at least a suspicion of nodes in the MRI or a PET, where I'm going to do a surgery for them, I tend to do a transperitoneal because I can go up to the presacral. In my personal opinion, in prostates, presacral node dissection is not required. Should give a choice of RP for all cases? Answer is yes, I would, unless you have grossly metastatic disease where you have every bone involved, especially visceral metastasis is there. Should we? Answer is why not? Why not? If you follow the presentation, we will definitely come to the answer for that. So please allow me to continue presentation, but keep your questions coming. At the end of the presentation, you yourself will be convinced that offering RP at the upfront is probably the best thing for these patients. So moving forward, median follow-up of 76 months, 9.3 men with high-risk disease died due to PC. 5-year estimated cancer-specific survival, RP versus RT is 96% versus 83%, 88%. So here is it, that you have a operative technique in locally advanced disease, which gives an excellent 5 and 10-year cancer survival. And why wouldn't we choose it? Once again, meta-analysis, RP versus RT in high-risk disease. The charts will be coming for this. This is called the Petrelli study, which came in 2014 in European urology. RP was associated with a much better overall survival, and see the p-value less than 0.00001. Cancer-specific mortality and non-cancer specific mortality. The non-cancer specific mortality, why should it be better in RP? The reason is most of the RT patients have 3 years of ADT. The ADT causes more damage as much as the RT itself. At 10 years, BCR and CR survival salvage therapy is 50%, 87%, and 37%. I always tell my patients in locally advanced disease, a third of them will have downgrading, meaning they are cured. A third of them will require further treatment, roughly a third. So this rule usually applies well. Radical prostate is a systemic review and meta-analysis. It came in PubMed as well. This is the same Petrelli study which I was telling. See the diamond of the forest plot, way towards radical prostatectomy compared to radiation. Only one study in 2006 was in favoring radical radiotherapy. All parameters, biochemical recurrence-free survival, freedom from local recurrence, see the difference. All the difference is p-value of less than 0.01. We can't ask for more. The overall survival following RP for high-risk prostate cancer is overall 10-year survival is about 80%. Low is 91, intermediate is 84, and high is 80. This, imagine a locally advanced breast cancer. You do a mastectomy for a 5-year survival of about 30 to 35% in 5 years. We are refusing to do a radical prostatectomy for a locally advanced disease where a survival of 80% is available. Why are we refusing it? I don't understand. Radical prostatectomy alone is a very good option for a clinically suspected high-risk localized disease. I'm going to show you a series of papers and publication looking at these very questions and you will be able to find that more and more papers and more evidence supports it. Now, is the radical prostatectomy for locally advanced disease any different than radical prostatectomy for a standard disease? The answer is yes. Those who followed my presentation would have noticed that I go quite wide. The incision is not in the plane between the endopelvic fascia on the pelvic wall and the endopelvic fascia on the prostate. It goes behind or beyond. You'll be lay bearing the endopelvic fascia on the pelvic wall. In the posterior, all the fat on top of the prostate, in fact, all the fat in the pelvis goes as lymph node complex. In the posterior plane and in the seminal vesicle, you focus on the bladder, roll the bladder back so that the whole seminal vesicle and the whole lot of the fat on the seminal vesicle goes with it. And in the posterior plane, go into the extrafascial plane. It is very easy and common for us to go into the transfascial plane, which is comfortable, but you have to open a bit wide and you see the rectal fat very clearly. Work on the rectal fat. The point is, it is very scary to do that, but once you got used to it, you'll be absolutely fine. And nerve sparing, for God's sake, don't do nerve sparing for these patients. Give a wide excision. Please keep in mind, these are oncological procedures. The functional outcome of these procedures are much secondary compared to oncological outcome. The only functional recovery that matters is continence. And for continence, all you do is get a good urethral length and a fantastic urethrovesical anastomosis and make sure the patient does a good pelvic floor physiotherapy. Yes, instead of 3 weeks or 4 weeks, he'll recover in 3 months, but he will recover. Some of the data published, 10-year and 15-year cancer-specific survival. Please note this. CSS and OS, 15 years, 85 and 53. 10 years, 88 and 72. These are huge numbers. I want to touch upon 2 important papers which got published. People criticize these 2 papers saying that they are retrospective, they are registry. In my dictionary, they are real-time, lifetime, street-smart papers. These are the things that are done in a day-to-day basis, and it tells you the real-life data, not in a trial setting. The Swedish observational study by Prasanna Suryakumaran, who is my contemporary, who now works in Guy's and St. Thomas's in London. When he was doing his fellowship in Sweden, he presented this. 34,000 men was assessed who had surgery and radiotherapy. See the forest plot. Barking. It is barking towards radical prostatectomy. Everything. Only in metastatic disease, it is towards radiotherapy. And even in the patients less than age 64, in metastatic disease, the dot is towards the right side. Meaning, even in those patients less than 64, they are likely to benefit with radical prostatectomy. Comparative effectiveness of RP versus RT, 5,800 patients, 11-year follow-up. Best in patients who had RP. And you have enough papers in the literature. Abdullah paper, this is an index paper. You will come into that paper in the next few minutes. Surgery versus radiotherapy, RP, 77%. ADT was given only in 41%. RT and ADT, where ADT was 100% in patients, it's only 67%. Abdullah paper, 2011. Fantastic paper, a telling tale to read. Whoever is interested should read this. 400,000 patients were assessed about 3 modalities. In all the modality, CSM and OCM was much better in RP compared to RT. In all modalities, all risk groups, end story. Only in the low risk disease, it was not that high, but elsewhere, intermediate and high risk disease, RP was much better. This paper was an index paper which many of the uro-oncologists who are practicing, who know in their heart that RP was a much better treatment than RT for high-risk disease, but was always put down in any MDT because the RT was always overwhelming with the Lancet BOLA data. This paper changed the scenario. From this onwards, we realized that in the real-life data, RP always exceeds better than RT when it comes to long-term survival and quality of life. This is the This is the Prasanna Suryakamaran study. And if you take the natural history of RP in high-risk disease, 10-year survival is only 14%. So if you take this question and think, oh my God, I should be treating all these patients properly, isn't it? So what are the prognosticators for BCR, biochemical recurrence? Gleason 9 and 10, PSA more than 20, surgical margins positive, and N1 disease. And 74% with SBI involvement. Now, another question people ask, should we give hormone therapy before radical prostatectomy? Now, the Ester-year data, as you would realize, the last line, is that it gives a better positive surgical margin, but does not give an overall survival advantage. Now, having said that, with the COVID, I think majority of the patients will be on hormones now, and you are going to have by 2022-23, we are going to have a huge data set, especially from West, which we have about patients who had neoadjuvant hormones and then had radical prostatectomy. So that I'm looking forward to see. My own gut feel is that it improves in case selection. It definitely allows better surgical resection and negative surgical margins, and it also, all the Gleason 3+3 gets killed off, and you're left with only Gleason 8, 9, 10 to deal. Neoadjuvant hormones, neoadjuvant chemotherapy was tried in the past, was not of great advantage, a marginal advantage in a trial setting. Nowadays, we have the docetaxel study going on. We'll have some data in 2021. Now, I'm going to touch upon adjuvant therapy. Time is 5:37. I have some more time to go. So you have done a radical prostatectomy. Now you think, what am I going to do now? Should we give adjuvant radiotherapy to all these patients? Because the adjuvant radiotherapy for all these patients is what, see, the radiotherapy people will always say, anyway, you're going to give radiotherapy to these patients. Why wouldn't you just give radiotherapy instead of doing radical prostatectomy? Now, I'm going to show you a couple of papers to show that adjuvant RT is no longer the standard of care. It's early salvage RT, and only 35 to 40% patient require it, which means that almost 60-70% patient doesn't require it. Adjuvant RT is useful, is as you would have seen from the Ester-year papers, but I'm going to move the slide forward to show. So these are the evidence for adjuvant RT for those exam-going student: EORTC 22911, SWOG 8794, ERO 9602 are extremely important papers. The Bola Lancet trial 2012, which showed that RT be given for all of them, and it showed that adjuvant RT after RP was useful. I completely agree. My question about that always that patients got over-treated, and that's probably the reason you see the diamond point so far away from the midline. Perhaps it is so significant because many patients who probably never needed it was getting treated. Now, then came the last year, 2019. We had 3 important trials came up: Radicals RT, RAVES, and GETUG. 55 to 60 grays, all of them. PSA more than 0.1 was a trigger in Radicals RT, versus in RAVES and GETUG, it was PSA more than 0.2. And I want you to focus on these data set, which clearly said that adjuvant, the patients are similar in the case selection, and we also had an artistic meta-analysis covering all the 3 trials. This is the only slide you need to focus about early versus adjuvant RT. You will clearly show that early salvage RT is much better than adjuvant RT. But you look at the diamond plot, you will always see that it is slightly close to the right side, meaning that it gives the advantage, but probably not overkills those patients. So nowadays, since 2016-17 onwards, I have been taking a policy of giving early salvage RT rather than adjuvant RT for all margin positive 8, 9, 10 patients. Okay, now we have done radical prostatectomy. Should I give adjuvant ADT? Okay, let's look at the data set for that. A portion of patients with EPLND might not require adjuvant RT. Roughly, it is told that 20% of patients with a single node less than 2 cm with no perinodal metastasis will not require ADT at all. But being me, I have a low threshold for giving ADT. So in patients who have no more than one node positivity, I tend to give ADT for 18 months. But generally 3 months is a good point where you can assess whether you want to give ADT or not. How about combining both adjuvant RT and radiotherapy? Yeah, you can combine both. Just you're not able to see the lower bits. If you just give me a second. Yeah, so sorry. What I was trying to do is try to see whether I can reduce the size so that I can see better. Adjuvant ADT with salvage RT seems to give a marginal advantage, but it comes with the cost of ADT for a long time. So what do I do? This is roughly the summary. Path node positive and persistent PSA, they get short-term or long-term ADT, and I'll be considering bed RT as well. But that will be based upon the fact that after giving ADT, I'll take a call on that. With PSA less than 0.1 at 6 weeks or 3 months, I reserve early salvage RT if the PSA goes beyond 0.1 but less than 0.2. Adjuvant chemotherapy, no, I don't give. Therefore, in high-risk disease, radical prostatectomy should be the first line of treatment for men with a non-metastatic cancer. Nowadays, with the oligometastatic cancer also being included for, for radical prostatectomy, one will be wondering that also will be eligible. And why do we do it? It allows a possibility for cure. Those who are deemed as high risk after surgery, 30% of them will have downgrading of their risk status. It allows sequential therapy. We give radiotherapy after radical prostatectomy. The side effects are no different than giving radiotherapy upfront. It avoids local complication. The patients are not going to come with 8 admissions requiring stenting, no stenting, nephrostomies, hematuриas, all those stuff. It doesn't increase the functional problem, especially, please do not think radical prostatectomy and radiotherapy will make the patient incontinent. Answer is no. And imagine radical prostatectomy after radiotherapy. Those who have done it will know that it's a nightmare. We have another 15 minutes to go. I'm just going to touch upon the oligometastatic disease. So famously described as low volume metastasis less than 4. Cancer has spread beyond prostate, but it's not considered extensive in number or organ sites. And treatment for the primary may improve PFS, CSS, and OS. Local therapy with RP or IMRT, not EBRT, is also a several benefit for these patients. We have only a single study, Hendrick study, which showed that cytoreductive radical prostatectomy in low volume skeletal metastasis seems to have a tiny bit of advantage before the CRPC status was reached. This is the data from Munich Cancer Registry. Those patients who had RP had advantage over the RT patients and ADT. So generally from there onwards, we decided that perhaps RP patients are much better, and therefore this could be a choice of treatment as well. ASEER-based data, Stephen Kulb's published in European Urology. It's all data from the SEER database between 2004 and 2010. Radical prostatectomy or brachytherapy or no surgery or radiation therapy. We had no surgery or radiation therapy in 7,811. RP was 245. And this is 2004, way back when radical prostatectomy was just being done by few experts in the world. And even in then, you can see that radical prostatectomy seems to score very well. All the top notches are all radical prostatectomy. So it gives a cancer-specific advantage with mortality, which is much less. Can RP control local complication in the CAP? Okay, this is the data which came in BJU. Look at that: AUR, TRP, HDUN, stent insertion, pelvic pain, clot retention. Okay, RP patients versus non-RP patients. The case stops there. Those who are listening to this hopefully will be convinced that we are doing a service to these patients rather than not doing a service to them. Abscopal effect is the concept to say that once you take the primary off, there is a regression of the secondaries. It's very classically seen in kidney cancer. The effect of it in prostate cancer is not that great. I have not seen one patient like that so far. What will be the future? The future will be very different. We will have neoadjuvant chemohormonal therapy followed by RT. Probably many of the low-risk disease such as Gleason 6 or even low-volume Gleason 7 may not have any treatment at all. Cytoreductive prostatectomy will become more common. There will be definitely a huge increase in the radical radiotherapy for oligometastatic disease as well. So slowly, from being loggerheads with each other between radical prostatectomy guys and radiotherapy guys, we'll start working in partnership. Take home message. Guys, thanks for listening and to this talk. All I want to say is radical prostatectomy is a good option in localized, intermediate, and high-risk disease. RP as a multimodality therapy translates better cancer-specific and overall survival in locally advanced and probably in oligometastatic disease as well. It achieves excellent local control, and by adopting a robotic technology, your morbidity of the patient is very, very low as well. But RCT will give the answers in future. And trust me, it is almost impossible to do an RCT between radical prostatectomy and radiotherapy. I strongly believe that multimodality therapy for high-risk cancer is the future. And I strongly believe that RP as a first step will allow patient to get the further sequencing without many complication. But I still take at least an hour of counseling with those patients, and that's what I will do as well. There will be cost implication because the patients are going to spend some more money getting 1 or 2 treatments. But their quality of life will be far superior. Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening. How much survival rate after radical prostatectomy? I can give my own patient data set. All patients who had T3B and N1, the 5-year survival with or without adjuvant therapy is near 90+%. I've just I'm crossing now 8 and 9-year survival. About 7th or 8th year, we are starting to lose patients, roughly. In India, if you look at the Western data, that is even more higher in terms of survival. For some reason, I strongly believe that Indian patients have a much worse disease. The biology of Indian patients seems to be far worse compared to the West. That's my personal opinion. That's what I'm observing as well. Any more questions for me?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. There were only greeting and regards for you. There was no any further questions.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to talk in this forum, and thanks for coming and thanks for listening.
Hello, sir. Can we end the session with your permission?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your insightful talk. Thank you, sir. We are ending the session.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.